All right, let's dive into the stack. Looks like we're all about leveling up those communication and reading skills today.
Definitely a good mix here. Business tips, academic strategies, even some literary analysis thrown in. Should be interesting.
I'm with you. It's like, how do we actually absorb information better? And then how do we use it? That's the real challenge.
Right, like how can we make sure we're not just skimming the surface, but really getting something valuable out of it?
Exactly. So, mission for today, extract the best tips and insights from all these sources.
Absolutely. Help everyone communicate more effectively. A&D become better readers in the process. That's the goal.
I like it. So where do we start?
Well, since communication is at the heart of everything, maybe you've got those two sources on the 7 C's of communication, one from Risley for business folks, and another taking a more general approach.
It's funny how those pop up everywhere. Why do you think those principles work in so many different places?
Well, think about it this way. Whether you're presenting to a boardroom or just chatting with a friend, you're still trying to get your message across.
True.
So the 7 C's give you like a framework for making that happen.
Makes sense. So some examples, I remember that Risley article had some great ones, like John, the manager, who totally nailed that holiday marketing campaign. They talked about clarity being so important there.
Oh, yeah, John. He was all about specifics. He didn't just say, let's get people engaged. He was like, we need to target Gen Z. We want a 10% increase in engagement, and here's how. Instagram campaign, live events. Boom.
Right to the point, no messing around. And speaking of getting to the point, I also remember that budget presentation from Risley. Emily just killed it, and they said it was all about confidence. Do you really think that makes such a big difference?
Oh, totally. It's contagious, It's not about being cocky. It's about believing in what you're saying. And when Emily presented that budget, you could tell she knew her stuff. She was clear. She was convincing.
Yeah. And when you see someone who's that confident, it makes you want to listen. Right?
Absolutely. But it's not just about confidence. It's also about how you deliver that message. Remember Chris, the manager who gave Emily feedback in the Risley article?
Right. He was super thoughtful about it, chose the right setting, the right tone.
It's so important, but we often forget about it, right? Like Chris showed Emily respect, gave her feedback in private, focused on how to improve.
Makes you think about how you give feedback, doesn't it? I know I'm definitely more receptive when someone's supportive and wants to help me grow.
Me too. So we've got clarity, confidence, courtesy. But we shouldn't get stuck on just the 7 C's. There's more to it than that. The Akish Tube video, for example. It emphasizes clear thinking, revision, taking risks in your writing.
Oh, yeah, that one. I actually needed to hear that. I get so caught up in getting the words down that I forget to, step back and really think, does this even make sense?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the weeds. But that video reminded me that good communication takes time, especially writing. It's about refining those thoughts, trying different things, not being afraid to start over if you have to.
Sometimes you got to just go for it, right? Take a risk and see what happens.
Exactly. Active listening. The courage to practice and challenge yourself. What do you think? Why is that so crucial?
Well, communication is a skill, isn't it? Like learning an instrument or a new language. The more you do it, the better you get. But it's not just about repetition, right? It's about challenging yourself, stepping outside your comfort zone.
Exactly. Like working a muscle. You got to push it to make it stronger.
Okay, so lots to think about already. But before we jump into reading strategies, what's the one big takeaway about communication so far for someone listening?
I think the biggest thing is intention. Approach every interaction with a purpose. Think about who you're talking to, what you're trying to say, and how you want to come across. Use the 7 C's as a guide, but remember, it's about more than just the rules.
So true. It's about being aware of yourself, how you communicate, and being open to trying new things.
Right. It's a process, a journey.
Well, speaking of journeys, we've got a whole other set of sources on active reading strategies. Ready to dive in?
Let's do it. That UNC article we have, it really makes you think about your purpose before you even start reading.
Huh. That's funny you say that because I used to think reading was just reading, just open the book and go.
It's easy to do that, but it's amazing how much more you get out of it when you have a goal in mind.
Yeah.
Like, are you skimming for information, or are you really trying to learn something new? Or maybe you're preparing to write something. It all changes how you approach it.
It's true. If you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up lost.
Exactly. And once you know your purpose, you can start using some of those active reading strategies from that McGraw Center piece.
Oh, yeah. That one had some good stuff like Ditch the highlighter. I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical about that one at first.
Yeah, it's easy to think that highlighting means you're like really engaged, but sometimes it's just the opposite. It can be super passive.
I know what you mean. Sometimes I'd highlight a whole paragraph and realize later that I hadn't really absorbed any of it. So McGraw Center says, use marginal notes instead. Write down questions.
Marginal notes are great. It forces you to actually think about what you're reading. You're putting things in your own words, making connections.
And they even suggested, like, trying to summarize each paragraph in a single sentence. That's got to be a good way to see if you're really getting it, right?
Summarizing. Oh, it's super helpful. Not just for understanding, but for remembering, too. If you can boil something down to a single sentence, it means you really understand it.
Makes sense. So we've got ditching the highlighter, we've got marginalia, we've got summarizing. What else did you find helpful?
Okay, well, that Jeffrey Kaplan lecture you had,
Yeah.
he talked about a system for marginalia. It's called a progressively expanding summary technique. Ever heard of that one?
Progressively expanding summary? No, I don't think so.
It's really interesting. Basically, you summarize each paragraph in the margin, and then you group those paragraphs together and summarize those and so on. So you're building like a multi-layered understanding of the text.
Wow, that sounds way more effective than my random highlighting. But, it's one thing to talk about active reading. It's another to see it in action. That's why I like that video by Benjamin Keep. He actually shows you how he does it with a paragraph about Queen Victoria.
Oh, yeah. That video is a great example of how you can really unlock those deeper layers of meaning. He doesn't just read the words, he interacts with them.
I love how he pointed out that, like, knowing other things about history actually helped him understand that paragraph better. Like, knowing when the American Revolution happened, suddenly this paragraph about Queen Victoria wasn't just about her family tree anymore.
Exactly. It shows how important it is to bring your own knowledge to the table. Reading isn't just about absorbing what's on the page, it's about connecting it to what you already know.
So we've talked about purpose, we've talked about ditching the highlighter, we've talked about note-taking and summarizing, and even this progressive summary thing, I feel like we're really getting somewhere. But if you had to pick one key takeaway about active reading, what would it be?
I think the most important thing is to remember that reading is an active process. It's not just about passively taking in information. It's about engaging with the text, asking questions, making connections.
Making it your own, right? It's like a conversation between you and the author.
Exactly. And speaking of conversations, there's this one source that gives you a really interesting framework for breaking down any piece of writing. It's called The Cry from Misi Pool.
Crite tool. That's a new one for me.
It stands for Claim, Reason, Information, and Transition. It's a way to really analyze and understand what you're reading. Like, you paraphrase, you observe, you contextualize, you analyze.
Wow, sounds pretty comprehensive. What are the steps?
So first you figure out what the author's main point is, their claim. Then you look at the reasons and the evidence they use to back it up. Then you look at the specific information, facts, statistics, that kind of thing. And finally, you see how they connect all their points together, how they transition from one idea to the next.
That seems like a great way to, like, really dissect a text. But is this just for academic stuff, or can you use it for other types of writing?
Oh, the great thing about the Crite tool is that you can use it for anything. News articles, poems, even social media posts. It helps you think critically about what you're reading, figure out the author's purpose, and form your own opinion.
It's like having a set of tools, right, for understanding anything you read. And speaking of understanding, that guide on textual evidence you included, it really stressed how important it is to use quotes effectively.
Oh yeah, that guide. It's like we were talking about before, with conciseness. Don't just throw in a giant quote and expect it to speak for itself. Choose the right quote, the one that really drives your point home.
It's like seasoning a dish, right? You don't want to overdo it, but you want just the right amount of flavor.
Exactly. And the guide also said, don't just summarize the plot or the argument. Use those quotes to analyze, to interpret, to add your own insights.
So don't just repeat what the author said. You have to show that you understand it and you can add to the conversation.
Right. They even had a good example of how to integrate a quote smoothly. Instead of saying, this quote shows, try something like, as Mick observes Gatsby's grace.
Oh, that's much better. You're bringing the reader into the experience, not just telling them about it.
And remember, these principles aren't just for literature. Think about how you use evidence in emails, reports, presentations, anything where you're trying to persuade or inform.
It's all about building a strong case. Wow, I feel like we've covered so much ground today. From communication basics to active reading to analyzing text and using evidence, what are some key things you hope people are taking away from all of this?
The biggest takeaway for me is this. Whether you're speaking, writing, or reading, do it with intention. Be present. Be engaged. Really put in the effort to understand and connect with the information.
Don't just sit there and let it wash over you. Make it your own. But there's one more piece of the puzzle, isn't there? We haven't touched on that guide to academic writing yet.
Yeah, we do have that guide on academic writing. Seems like a good place to wrap things up.
It does, actually. It talks about a lot of important stuff: cohesion, clarity, logical order, consistency, unity, all those things you need for a good argument, especially in academia.
It's funny, though, because it's not just about grammar rules, is it?
It's about presenting your ideas in a way that makes sense, so people can follow along, like building a house, everything in its place.
Perfect analogy. And one thing that really stuck out to me was that principle of completeness. Making sure you include all the important information, even if your source doesn't spell it out for you.
Interesting. So it's not enough to just repeat what you've read.
Right. You got to go a step further. Make sure your reader really understands. Like, imagine you're presenting a case to a jury.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just say, he's guilty, and leave it at that. You have to lay it all out. The evidence, the context.
Yeah.
The same goes for academic writing.
So sometimes you might have to do extra research or consult multiple sources to fill in those gaps.
Exactly. You got to be thorough. Make sure your argument is solid. Oh, and the guide also mentioned variety and formality in academic writing.
Oh, that's a tough one. How do you keep things engaging without being too casual?
It's a balance, for sure.
Yeah.
Using a variety of words and sentences helps. But you also don't want to sound like unprofessional.
Right, right. So it's like finding the right outfit. You want to look sharp, but not too stuffy.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've really explored a lot today, from those 7 C's of communication to active reading strategies to this whole world of academic writing. What are your final thoughts? What do you hope people will take away from all of this?
I think the main thing is this. Approach everything with intention. Whether you're writing an email or giving a presentation, reading a textbook or a research paper, be present, be engaged. Really try to understand and connect with the information.
Don't just let it go in one ear and out the other. Make it your own.
Absolutely. It's all about learning and growing. The more you practice these skills, the better you'll get at communicating in every part of your life.
And on that note, I have one last thought for our listeners. How might all of this change not just how you communicate and learn, but how you see the world around you?
Ooh, that's a good one. Could these skills help you understand things better? Make deeper connections? Find more meaning in all that information we're bombarded with every day? I guess that's something to think about.
Definitely something to explore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.